Harry Truman is our 33rd president and was born in Independence, Missouri on May 8th, 1884. He ends up serving as President of the United States from 1945 to 1953 and was a lifetime member of the Democratic Party. He previously had served as the 34th Vice President from January of 1945 until April of 1945 under Franklin Roosevelt. He was also a United States Senator from Missouri from 1935 until January of 1945. His boyhood was spent in Independence, Missouri. This was a place that could be considered the best and the worst of small-town America. They were Midwestern in terms of placing value on humility and hard work, but attached a stigma to Catholics and Jews, and more like the Jim Crow South in terms of African Americans. Harry's grandmother and to a lesser extent his mother hated Lincoln and thought of John Wilkes Booth as a hero. Their racial epithets slipped easily off the tongue, and it would not be until later years that Harry's exposure to other races and cultures would actually enlighten him. His father was a scrappy guy who gambled, drank, got in fights, but he was also a hard-working farmer, though he lost much of the family's money in grain futures. Harry spent a good deal of his life trying to win his approval, but it was obvious Harry's younger brother was actually his father's favorite. As a child, Harry himself said he was kind of a sissy. If there was a fight, you'd usually see him running away from it. He wore glasses, was practically blind without them, and in fact, legally blind in one eye. He played piano, practiced 2 hours every morning starting at 5:30 a.m., and he liked to read. Harry Truman claims to have read every book in the local library. He fell for Bess Wallace. He first noticed her in Sunday school when he was 6, and she would be the only girl he ever pursued. Now, she was a year older than him in school, and in high school, he started writing her letters. Bess had a lot of boyfriends, and Bess's mother, Madge, never thought Harry was good enough for Bess. But she didn't think anybody was. Bess's father had committed suicide, and Bess's mother never really got over it, emotionally, and felt it disgraced her socially for the rest of her life. And she made it clear it was Bess's obligation to take care of her, which may account for her discouraging any of Bess's boyfriends. Harry dreamed of going to college, but his father lost all their money in cattle. Harry, like everything else with his father, took it in stride. He moved to Kansas City after high school, and he became a bank clerk. He liked the culture. A big city provided all sorts of shows, concerts, and in the 4 years that he lived there, he had come into his own and made a lot of friends. Nonetheless, he's terribly insecure when it came to girls, and by age 26, had never had a girlfriend, though he still kept up his correspondence with Bess back home. His father was given the chance to run his mother-in-law's farm, Harry's grandmother, and told Harry he needed him to return home and help him. Once again, Harry didn't complain, and for the next 8 years, Harry worked hard farming side by side with his father, who continued to be very difficult to please. But over the years, Harry felt that his father had finally come to see him for the hard-working man with integrity that Harry Truman actually was. Now, he continued to pursue Bess, and when he found out she had taken up tennis, he invited her to play one Sunday and actually made a grass tennis court for her on the farm. She didn't show up. In his letters to her, he never got angry or frustrated, and said he totally understood that someone like her could never go for a common farmer like him. He nonetheless, in one of his letters, proposed, and she turned him down. he wasn't deterred. She did concede a while later that if she ever did get married, it would probably be to him. Harry invested in oil wells. He wanted to be wealthy enough to deserve Bess. He even convinced Bess to invest her own money and lost it all. Very much like his father, whose prospects never seemed to work out. This was a oil venture that just seemed to go south, and he ended up selling his stock for pennies on the dollar. A new company came in and took over, drilled deeper, and struck it rich. So if he'd persisted, he'd have been a millionaire. When World War I broke out, Harry signed up in a patriotic fervor and thought that it might give him direction. He memorized the eye chart just to get in. His eyesight was so bad he couldn't have gotten in otherwise. Just before shipping out, Bess finally agreed to marry Harry. But he said no. He thought it wouldn't be right to let her commit to someone who may return home disabled. Harry was put in charge of a bunch of rowdy Irish, Battery D. 4 captains previously had given up on them and transferred out. Harry was not a big guy, but he was feisty, and he would really give these guys hell and not take a lot of guff from them. He once yelled at them all that I don't have to get along with you, but you sure as hell better get along with me. When under German fire at Verdun at night, they all started to run chaotically, and he swore at them and cursed them into getting back into order and then escorted them out of danger. They began to see this guy, Harry Truman, with a new respect, and Harry found a new self-respect as well. And he left the military having established himself as a leader of men. He had taken Battery D through some of the bloodiest fighting in history, and they all lived to tell about it. Not one casualty. They would stay loyal to Harry for the rest of their lives. Harry returned home and married Bess. She asked him to live in the family house with her and her mother, quote unquote, just temporarily. Harry did so without complaint for the next 15 years. His mother-in-law was always derisive towards him, demanding, and a general pain in the ass. Harry never said a bad word about her. He opened a haberdashery with his best friend Eddie Jacobson. A haberdashery is essentially men's accessories, ties, belts, hats. And despite being best friends, Madge would never allow Harry to invite Eddie over to dinner because Eddie was Jewish. 2 years later, in the post-war recession, the store went under. His war buddy, Jim Pendergast, introduced him to his uncle, Tom Pendergast. Tom was a loud and amiable, friendly Irishman, drinker, gambler, racketeer, and the head of the Kansas City political machine. Anybody seeking political office went through him. Tom thought Harry would be good for his political machine. Harry was untainted, respectable, and a veteran. So Tom ran him for county commissioner. Technically, the title would be a judge. Although you do more than just sit on a bench, you actually get involved in all sorts of county projects. And Harry won that election by 279 votes. He pours himself into his work and feels like he's finally found his calling. He oversaw the construction of 2 county courthouses and an ambitious plan that greatly improved the county's roads. While investigating how to design these different buildings at his own expense, Harry drove many, many miles looking at other structures, drove as far as Denver, Colorado, and developed a real aptitude for architecture, which proves to come in handy when he's President of the United States. The White House, at one point after becoming president, Harry recognizes it is falling down. It is in major need of repair. And Harry Truman lived at Blair House during all of this, across the street, which is the residence for the president when the White House is uninhabitable. And he oversaw the reconstruction of the White House and kept it quiet. He didn't think it was something Americans needed to know about. And he ended up taking reporters on a tour after it was all done, and they were absolutely shocked at how much he knew, not just about architecture, but history, as he told them all about everything that went on in the different various rooms in the White House. Now, while he is judge and county commissioner, Harry has misgivings about turning a blind eye to Tom Pendergast, who is, like the leader of all political machines, ripping off city funds. And Harry questions whether he can remain part of a corrupt political entity, even though he wasn't corrupt himself. Well, it becomes a moot point, but because of term limits, he is out of a job as he nears 50. On his 50th birthday, he checks himself into a motel for 3 days and despairs that he has no future. At age 60, he is president. He wants to run for the vacant Senate seat in 1934, and Tom Pendergast almost laughs at him, despite some of Tom's aides endorsing Harry. Now, 3 of Tom's choices all turn him down. One who has started the campaign dies during the campaign, so at last, Tom Pendergast finally concedes and runs Harry Truman for the U.S. Senate, believing he didn't have much of a chance of winning anyway. His army buddies campaigned for him. In one city, they flew him to an event in a biplane. The plane landed, Harry got out, and puked. Pendergast stuffs the ballot boxes in Kansas City, and Harry wins election to the United States Senate. Now, he enters the Senate under a cloud of suspicion and corruption, but slowly he garners the reputation of being the hardest working guy in the Senate. He volunteers for committees. He always shows up, even when no one else does. He listens to hours of tedious testimony, never misses a vote. He's the first one in, last one out, yet Franklin Roosevelt is not terribly impressed with him. Slowly, though, other senators grow to see that he's the honest, hard-working man that he seems. Harry wants to investigate government programs selling products to the government and starts a committee. Franklin Roosevelt doesn't like this idea. During a time of war, he thinks it's a bad idea to be investigating American corporations. Harry drives around to production plants, and he'll wander through, and no one questions him. They don't know who he is. He'll see no one working, lots of material simply piling up. He'll ask questions of people, and again, no one knows who he is. He determines the government is being shamelessly fleeced. So he forms a successful committee and ends up ultimately saving the U.S. billions of dollars during World War II. The committee is a bipartisan committee made up of Democrats and Republicans, and on every issue that he leads, they vote unanimously. This gives a lot of credibility to Harry as a leader, and a bipartisan one at that. Despite his association with the Tom Pendergast political machinery, Harry has become a highly respected senator, particularly after the success of his wartime committee. When FDR runs for a 4th term, he believes he needs to replace the self-avowed socialist Henry Wallace as his vice presidential candidate. Now, Wallace was a well-respected, forward-thinking Democrat, kind of the Bernie Sanders of his time, and like Bernie Sanders, is viewed too far to the left and might therefore alienate voters. Roosevelt wants to be sure to be reelected and believes the upcoming election could be a close one. No one had ever won 3 terms, much less a 4th, and he wants badly to make sure that he finishes the job of getting the United States through World War II. As it turns out, he could have kept Wallace on the ticket because he wins in a landslide. For a myriad of reasons, Harry Truman claims he did not want to be vice president. His wife did not want to be in Washington, D.C. any longer, and it was well known that Franklin Roosevelt was in failing health, and the likelihood was great that whomever was vice president would inherit the office of the presidency. Now, being told that Truman was reluctant, FDR purportedly called on the phone and said that if he wants to break up the Democratic Party in the middle of a war, well, that's his responsibility. And he slammed down the receiver. At the end of that call, Harry went, well, why didn't he just say so? At the Democratic convention, there was a lot of support for Wallace, but Truman became what they called the Missouri Compromise by appeasing both Southern conservatives and Northern liberals. Bess has no interest in being in Washington, D.C., and goes home to independence. His daughter, Margaret, is much more enthused and enjoys the politics and the excitement of the capital. Harry Truman became Franklin Roosevelt's 3rd vice president, but is a lonely man who misses his family very much. Less than 3 months in office, when just after 5 o'clock on April 12, 1945, Harry is having a drink with Sam Rayburn, as he does most days at 5 p.m., the Speaker of the House, when he is summoned to the White House. When he arrives, Mrs. Roosevelt told him, "Harry, the president is dead." Truman asked, "Is there anything I can do for you?" But Mrs. Roosevelt responded, "Is there anything we can do for you? For you are the one in trouble now." At 7:09 that evening, Harry S. Truman was sworn in as the 33rd President of the United States. The next day, Truman told reporters on Capitol Hill, "Boys, if you ever pray for me now. I don't know if you fellows ever had a load of hay fall on you, but when they told me yesterday what had happened, I felt like the moon, the stars, and all the planets had fallen on me." He was looked upon as a country bumpkin, a rube, a farmer, and a man clearly out of his depth, trying to fill shoes much too big for him to fill. He is insecure, but exudes confidence anyway, and he ends up seeing the U.S. through to the end of the World War.